Hey everybody, welcome to Algo Expert. In this video, we're going to answer the following behavioral interview question. Imagine you had a low performer on your team. How would you handle the situation? What would you do to help them? So I think that the very first thing you want to do when you're dealing with a low performance issue is to identify the issue. You have to figure out what exactly it is that we're dealing with here. For example, did the person, the perceived low performer, introduce a single bug in production? Did they perform poorly throughout an entire project? What does that mean if that's the case? Is it that they were slow throughout the project? Is it that they failed to deliver the results of the project? Did they repeatedly introduce bugs in production? Did they show a consistent trend of low performance across multiple projects? All of these things are very different, and it's very important to identify which one is actually the case here. Because if we take the instance of a single bug being introduced in production, I would argue that in most cases, that's not actually an issue of low performance. That's just a normal occurrence. And if we have a blameless engineering culture, then, it's not the fault of the perceived low performer. There are many other people and processes and systems that might be equally to blame or to share the blame. So, very important to identify the issue. Now, the second thing that you want to do is you want to identify the cause of the issue, the cause of the low performance. And specifically, you want to be able to answer whether their low performance is their fault or not their fault. And I know that this sounds kind of, harsh, a little bit harsh, but it's really important because oftentimes the low performance isn't their fault. For example, maybe the person was assigned a project that isn't on par with their level. Maybe they're a brand new junior engineer and they were assigned a project that should have been assigned to a senior engineer with a lot of context in the code base. And if no one realizes this, then they're going to be perceived as a low performer, even though they're actually not. Another example of how it might not be their fault is maybe the code base is just riddled with tech debt, and it's unfair to blame the engineer on, struggling to work in such a code base when it's just the environment that's not great. Or maybe there was an external dependency for the project that failed to deliver, and so this engineer was blocked, and it wasn't their fault, it was an external dependency's fault. Or maybe the rest of the team didn't communicate well with this engineer. So it's very important to realize if it's really something that's not their fault that's causing this low performance. On the other hand, it might be their fault. Maybe it is that they are repeatedly doing the same mistakes, despite having, presumably learned from their past mistakes, they're repeatedly doing them again and again. Or maybe they're not asking for help when they should. Maybe, you see that they get stuck often and they just don't ask for help. That could be an example. Or maybe they are quantifiably not performing as well as other people. Like you can clearly see that they're working in the same code base on, similar sized projects and just pumping out far less code in the same period of time as somebody else. But all of these things are nuanced and they're very important to identify. The last point that I'll make here is that, sometimes an engineer will base themselves off of lines of code or number of pull requests as an indicator of how performant somebody is, but that's not always indicative, right? Sometimes for one project, or not even for one project, but just one engineer will send out a bunch of pull requests and another engineer will only send out, 2 pull requests, but those 2 pull requests will be far more complex and tricky than, the 10 other pull requests that the other engineer sent out. So all of these things, very important to kind of study. Now, once you've identified that this person really is a low performer and that it is their fault, presumably, then I think the simplest way to try to handle the situation is to help them. And I think that can come in the form of constructive feedback, telling them, hey, it looks like you might be taking a bit of time on this particular part of the project. Is there anything that's holding you down? And maybe asking them, what they think about it. And then also just offering help. I think one of the key things that can help people who are performing not as well as they should be is to just make yourself available to them, to answer questions for them, to unblock them, and oftentimes you have to kind of push them to ask for help. I think that is very common, where people just feel inhibited to ask for help, and it's important to tell them that they can ask for help. Now, of course, if they repeatedly don't ask for help, then that's an issue. One thing that I think is important to do when you're dealing with low performance is to, at least here I'm talking about in a big tech company environment, is to document everything and to document steps that were taken to improve the performance of the perceived low performer. And this can really help them, because if it turns out that the project or their perceived low performance wasn't their fault, it's important to have that documented so that, in 6 months down the line, you don't have a new person who comes in and just sees, oh, well, this person failed to deliver that project 6 months ago in a certain amount of time, therefore they performed poorly, when in fact, it was due to an external dependency. So important to document that kind of stuff. And also, if they were in fact, performing poorly and they took steps to improve on their performance and actually did improve, that's a great thing to document and can actually help them a lot in their next performance review, for their next promotion, and so on and so forth. It's always important to document. And then finally, I would say, if there's a consistent issue related to performance, no improvement is perceived, nothing really changes, then eventually, of course, you might have to escalate to the person's manager, to let them know that they might have to deal with something there. And of course, that's no longer up to you. That's kind of somebody else's job. So that's how I would handle a low performer on a team. And yeah.